Shalom, my friends. Before Shabbat started here in Judea, Jeremy and I had a conversation about how we were going to proceed with the fellowship and ensure that we'd be able to stay connected and in touch with all of you if our current methods of communication were shut down for some reason. Even a year ago, such a conversation would have really seemed ludicrous, but in light of the shocking events that are unfolding before our eyes in the world today, it feels like in order to be responsible, you really need to have a contingency plan for every scenario. The reason we had this discussion was because of the unprecedented moves of control and censorship on the internet and the very means of communication that we use every day. The degree of partisan censorship and banning by these social media giants has gotten so out of control that the five big internet titans, Apple, Google, Twitter, Facebook, and Amazon, came together and actually colluded and cooperated to take down alternate platforms of communication, not just out of the Google store or the Apple store, but off the entire internet. And whether you're following all of this or not, most people feel that something very significant and dangerous is playing out in America and the world. So much so that Germany, Poland, and other European countries came out criticizing America for its violations of freedom and liberty. When Germany is criticizing America, rightly and justly criticizing America for violating liberty and freedom of speech, you know you've arrived at a very strange and alarming point in both American and world history. And this isn't partisan or political. This is an issue of human rights. I, of course, believe that everyone from the far left to the far right should at least have the right to speak and express themselves. While there are, of course, dangers to that, the dangers come nowhere near the danger of stifling speech, ideas, and expression. Now, while this all seems very new, these tech giants and censorship and all of this, the truth is that it's simply a new manifestation of a very old, even ancient phenomenon, the spiritual seeds of which we can see in this week's Torah portion. After all, the same elements of control, manipulation, and domination, which these high-tech social media and internet giants are drunk upon, we see manifested in ancient Egypt, in both Pharaoh and in his sorcerer magicians. You see, the Egyptians were polytheistic. They worshipped many gods which represented different forces of nature, and these magicians believed that they could control these forces of nature. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Zichrono Livracha, points out the parallel, which once you see, you simply can't unsee it. He explains that magic in the times of idolatrous mythic Egypt was very much the same thing as technology is in the age of science. A civilization that believes it can manipulate the gods, he explains, believes that it can exercise coercion over human beings. And in such a culture, the concept of freedom is unknown. If you can control the gods, the next rational step would be to believe that you're a god yourself. And if you can control the elements, you can control mankind. So in dealing with the first two plagues, Pharaoh's magicians saw that the blood and the frogs, they didn't see them as miracles, but as magic. These plagues were a manipulation of the forces of nature, which they themselves were able to replicate. And therefore, they looked at Moses and Aaron not as men of God, but as magicians like themselves. It's only at the third plague, the plague of these microscopic little lice, that they realized that they could not copy it. They couldn't bring forth lice, and therefore they were forced to admit that these plagues were done by the finger of God. And there's more than a little bit of humor that while they were able to turn the Nile red with blood, fill Egypt with frogs, that they were not able to create creatures as small and significant as tiny little lice. The magicians admitted that they were bested. They were embarrassed, and they were humbled, and they admitted to Pharaoh that a God more powerful than him was behind these plagues. This must have been a devastating blow to their self-image, to their perception of Pharaoh as a god, and of themselves as mini-gods. But they had the eyes to see, and being that the only vaccine for arrogance is humility, indeed, they were humbled. But Pharaoh was not. God hardened Pharaoh's heart and prevented him from returning or repenting. And while there are volumes written on what actually means that God hardened Pharaoh's heart, the answer that always felt the truest to me was that which was given by the great sage known as Sforno. The Sforno explains that God didn't remove Pharaoh's free will, he granted it. He returned it to him. that any person who saw these nature-defying plagues wreak havoc on an entire nation and mock each and every one of their deities would be forced to admit the truth. So just as God bent nature in the plagues, he had to bend Pharaoh's free will in the opposite direction to restore his free will to him. However you understand it, Pharaoh decided not to let the people go, but to keep the nation of Israel enslaved in Egypt. But here's the question, my friends. At that moment, when the plagues got so bad that Pharaoh's advisors said to him, Ad matai yezeh lanu lemokesh, shlach et anashim. For how long will these people be a snare for us? Let the people go and worship their God. Do you not realize that Egypt is ruined? Here's the question. At that moment, when Pharaoh did not let them go, couldn't let them go, at that moment, who was really the slave? Pharaoh is so dedicated to his belief that he is God, that it becomes an insane obsession. He becomes fully enslaved to this belief. So great was his arrogance that even the death of the firstborn and the downfall of Egypt would not be able to fully bring down his prideful belief in himself being God. While the nation of Israel was still in physical chains, Pharaoh was the greatest slave of all, slave to his unwavering belief in his own divinity. And so, my friends, we're seeing the rise of governments stripping people of their liberties and freedoms. We see these internet tech giants more powerful and wealthy than most world governments, so powerful that they've come to believe that they are gods, that they can control and manipulate not only nature, but people, that they can strip people of their freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and freedom of privacy because they are in control, because the power lies with them. And that's why, at the moment, from a simple, shallow perspective, it may feel like they are in control. But to some degree, it may still feel like our fate is in their hands. On a deeper, truer level, they're the true slaves. Slaves to their own perceived power and slaves to their own arrogance. But just as Pharaoh and his magicians were humbled, so will be their fate. The stage is merely being set. That's why in our prayers we recognize the God of Israel is mashpil geim umagbia shafalim. He humbles the wicked and he glorifies the humble. Their power will be short-lived. And just like Pharaoh and his magicians, they will be brought down. Not even so much as a punishment, but as a kindness, however painful it may be for them, because humility is the consequence of a recognition of truth. That we are not the authors of history, but God is. And if God puts us in a position of power over others, we are to use that power to demonstrate love and kindness and compassion, to grant them freedom and liberty. For that is the true nature of the Torah, to be kind and compassionate to the powerless. That is the nature of Shabbat, of the Sabbath, to release shackles and to end oppression. That is our mission here in this world. And so I end with this prayer. Hashem, the world is in a place of fear and instability and confusion. Governments and organizations and people are seeking to enslave and control. Hashem, please reveal yourself and shatter their illusions of their own power and of themselves as gods. Reveal yourself to the world, Hashem. Unshackle those who are bound, free those who are enslaved, and tekab b'shofar gadol cherutenu. Sound the great shofar of liberty, so that the world will know that you alone rule. You alone are in control. You alone are our Father. And we are your children, all of mankind, brothers and sisters, who love each other because we're the children of the one true God. Thank you, my friends. Hold tight, stay strong, stay connected. Reach out to me with any questions and thought you have anything. Ari@thelandofisrael.com. Back to you, Jeremy.